Greetings, lovely people. Thank you so much for joining me. Family, amazing things happen at the UN 80th anniversary. And at the same time, embarrassing stuff went on there. But you know, today we are not going to look at the embarrassing aspect. I think I have to do part 2 of this video. So this is part 1. Let's treat this one as part 1. I'll come for part 2. I follow through the procedure, arrangement and the speeches of the leaders, both the European leaders and African leaders. And I was asking myself this question that, look, the president of Ghana and William Ruto, are they trying to blast the UN completely? Like, it looked like these people came prepared. But, lovely family, let me leave Ruto aside. Let's talk about the president of Ghana. The man actually clashed with Donald Trump. You know, after Donald Trump came to speak, he laid certain foundations on certain things. He laid a lot of foundation, you know, draw some plans on the ground and things. When the president of Ghana came to the picture, he completely broke the foundation of Donald Trump. I'm telling you. Now, the speech is not so long, and I'm going to make sure that I will only pull out the highlights for us to understand exactly what he's talking about. So I put out some key points that the president raised. Very important key points that I know that we'll be interested in, or something vital for us to deliberate on. And I must say that Mr. President John Dramani Mahama, my goodness, you will deliver. I mean, you deliver to the core. Anyway, lovely people, let's drop the excitement and get right to work. The first point that the president raised was Africa's absence at the founding of the UN. This is point number 1. Okay, the president reminded the world that only 4 African nations were present at the UN's founding in 1945.
At this 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, I'd like to speak about Africa's role in the future of this organization. However, it's impossible to do that without first considering the collective role that Africa played in its founding, which was small and relatively insignificant. Of the 51 member states involved in the founding of the United Nations in 1945, only 4 were African: Egypt, Ethiopia, Liberia, and South Africa. It is important to point out that the United Nations came into being in the aftermath of World War II because of the inability of its predecessor, the League of Nations, to avert a large-scale global conflict, which had been its guiding purpose when it was founded in 1920 at the end of the First World War. Out of the 42 founding member states of the League of Nations, only 3 were African: Liberia, the Union of South Africa, and Ethiopia. Egypt was to join later in 1937. Africa's overall participation in the organization's founding was minimal and relatively unimportant. That's because before all the other talks and meetings, representatives from a group of 14 nations gathered in Berlin for a series of discussions that began in 1884 and which led to the partitioning and formal colonization of the African continent, which is also called the Scramble for Africa. It has famously been written that past is prologue. Well, in the past, the majority of the 54 nations that now comprise Africa were never offered a seat at the table where plans for a new world order were being drawn.
Finally, this is not just a point raised by the president. These expose the deep hypocrisy of global governance. The very system that claimed to promote sovereign quality was built on African exclusion. Europe met in Berlin in 1884 to carve or to cave us, whichever that English put it, and to pieces us like a meat at the butcher's table. Yet today, lovely people, these are the same people that preach democracy and equality to us. This contradicts. So this actually raises serious questions. How can African trust a system born out of colonial theft and blood? Exactly. If we weren't allowed in the beginning, why should we accept being treated as a second-class member now? Now, lovely people, let's move from there and go to the second point that the president raised. The president of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama, pointed the world to the fact that the future is African.
But, Madam President, as fate would have it, the tables are turning, and Africa's role in the authorship of whatever is yet to come for this world is going to be huge, and it will be consequential. According to this organization's own projections, by the year 2050, more than 25% of the world's population is expected to come from the African continent. Additionally, by 2050, 1/3 of all young people aged between 15 to 24 will be residing on the African continent. So you see, the future of this world is African. Allow me to say this once again a little louder for those of you in the back. The future is African. Already today, Africa is a catalyst for human potential and development, as well as for economic reform and ecological stability. Africa is a catalyst for systemic change. If this reality, which is fact-based and straightforward, seems provocative or unsettling, perhaps it's because you are viewing it through the lens of centuries of filters, colonialism and imperialism, and the resulting implicit bias. Maybe you are unaware of the resilience of African nations or their remarkable ability to make a strong comeback just when you think it's safe to count them out.
These statistics that the president pulled out, letting them understand that by 2050, according to their own eyeglasses, over 25% of the world population will be African, pointing them that the future is Africa. These lovely people is not just a statistic. It is a warning shot that the president gave them. He is pointing them to something that they are not paying attention to. They can see it actually, but they don't know that the rise of Africa is actually coming to pass. So they're just looking at it. So he's giving them warning. So what the president said is nothing but a warning shot, because the reason why I said warning shot is because the world actually fear an African that wakes up. They fear our youth, our numbers, our potential. That is even the reason why Western propaganda paint Africa as poor, chaotic, and corrupt. It is not to describe us. It is to control us. The images you see about Africa is just to control us. And when the President John Dramani Mahama said the future is African, then we must seize it. We must not be begging the UN to recognize it. That is my point here. The president made it clear that the tables are turning. That is truth. The tables are actually turning, but only if Africans unite, refuse dependency, and stop dancing to IMF and the World Bank dictates. Now, lovely people, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. The president went on and asked for the UN security reform. He's asking, as other former leaders, that the UN Security Council should be reformed. He demanded a permanent African seat with veto power. Ruto also did the same thing.
Madam President, I believe that in honor of this milestone celebration, the United Nations should also embark on a process of serious recalibration and establish its own reset agenda. Madam President, the UN Founding Charter is outdated when it comes to representation in this August Assembly. The most powerful post-World War II nations are still being rewarded with an almost totalitarian guardianship over the rest of the world. And yet, the first sentence in Chapter 2, Article 1 of the UN Charter declares that the organization is based on the principle of sovereign equality of all its members. If this were true, and was the case, a continent as large as Africa, with its numerous UN member states, would have at least one permanent seat on the Security Council. Furthermore, we believe that veto power should not be restricted to only 5 nations, nor should it be absolute. There must be a mechanism in this House for the General Assembly to challenge a veto. No single nation should be able to exercise an absolute veto to serve its own interests in a dispute. In 1995, during the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, Nelson Mandela stood in this very spot, and he said, "The United Nations has to reassess its role, redefine its profile, and reshape its structures. It should truly reflect the diversity of our universe and ensure equity among the nations in the exercise of power within the system of international relations in general, and the Security Council in particular." I close quotations. 30 years later, we African leaders are still making the same simple request for a permanent seat on the Security Council with the power of a veto. We demand not only a reform of the Security Council, but also a reset of the global financial architecture, which is currently rigged against Africa.
Lovely people, this is like, pouring water on the wall. This is not the first time African leaders are asking this. Mugabe said it countless times. Nobody mind him. And I don't think they're even going to mind them, because there at the meeting, none of the Europeans were talking about Africans having a permanent seat or whatever. No, it is rather Africans, forcing this. We are not supposed to beg for respect. You need to command respect, like how Ibrahim Traore is doing. For 80 years, Africa has begged for seats at the table that was designed to keep us out. Let us be real, lovely people. The UN Security Council, I would say, is nothing but a legalized dictatorship by 5 nations with suit and tie. Because why must Africa plead for permission to be represented in the world order built on our stolen resources? That alone is an insult on its own, though, but we go with the flow. Africa's mineral fuel Europe wealth. Yet we as Africans do not have decisive voice in global security. That is another insult on its own. So the president was hitting the direct key point. But Mr. President John Dramani Mahama, I clap for you for your speech. It was powerful. But this is it. As a citizen of this country and a child of this continent, I say that if we as Africans want true power, we must invest in our own institutions. An African Security Council, an African Monetary Fund, an African Court of Justice, instead of begging the same powers who enslaved us and exploited us. This is just my opinion. Now let's go to another interesting point raised by the president of Ghana: reparation of slavery and colonialism. The president of Ghana pushed for recognition of slavery as the greatest crime committed against humanity and demand reparations added to it.
Madam President, the slave trade must be recognized as the greatest crime against humanity. As the African champion on reparations, Ghana intends to introduce a motion in this August body to that effect. More than 12.5 million Africans were forcibly taken against their will and transported to create wealth for the powerful Western nations. We must demand reparations for the enslavement of our people and the colonization of our land that resulted in the theft of our natural resources, as well as the looting of artifacts and other items of cultural heritage that have yet to be returned in total.
Everybody who follow this platform, you will understand that I'm somebody that I don't agree with reparation, but let's go with the flow. It is a good thing that a leader dare to raise the real debt the world owe Africa. The only thing I can say is that in asking for reparation, let us not only demand money, but we must demand control of our land, our gold, our oil, our cocoa, our cobalt. Reparation without sovereignty, I think, is empty. Let's go to the next one, lovely people. The president raised a very interesting conversation, which I know you love. You will love it. Family, you will love it. The president of Ghana raised the issue of the control of Africa's natural resources.
In this era of global uncertainty, Africa must exercise sovereignty over its natural resources to raise the necessary funds to ensure the well-being of its citizens. The days of parceling out vast concession areas to foreign interests for exploitation must come to an end. We'll continue to welcome foreign investment, but we must negotiate better for a bigger share of the natural resources that belong to us. And we must insist on value addition to these resources. We're tired of the continued image of poverty-stricken, disease-ridden rural communities living at the periphery of huge foreign-controlled natural resource concession areas. We're tired of having people extract the most they can from us and in return offer us the very least by way of respect, consideration, and dignity. We're tired of not being represented in ways that reveal the richness and complexity of our history or acknowledge all that we have overcome to arrive here.
He hit the point straight to their faces. I'm loving the fact that these speeches were not spoken at African Union meeting. It was said at the UN. Look like the president of Ghana actually prepared for this. It is true. This is a fact, because Africa, we cannot develop by exporting raw materials and importing finished goods. That cannot make us develop. That in itself is slavery by another name. When foreign companies take our gold, bauxite and lithium and give us nothing but holes on the ground or in the ground, that is economic colonization. So the President John Dramani Mahama said this very well. He made them understand that we are tired of poverty-stricken images while our lands makes others rich. What he's simply saying is that, look, you say Africa is the poorest continent. Meanwhile, some of you are rich because of Africa. It doesn't make any sense. The term has come to add value in Africa, to build African industries, and to negotiate as a united continent. Individually, Ghana, Mali, Nigeria can be bullied, but together, Africa we will be unstoppable. Now, this is where the president log home with Donald Trump, the climate change and migration.
Let's dispense with the euphemisms and dog whistles and speak frankly. It is not a mystery that when leaders of Western nations complain of their migration problems, they are often referring to immigrants from the global south. But many of those immigrants are climate refugees. And interestingly, the global north emits 75% more greenhouse gases than the global south. However, the effects of climate change are more severe in the global south because we lack the resources to address them effectively. And so when the desert encroaches on our villages and towns and they become unlivable, we are forced to flee. Madam President, we cannot normalize cruelty. We cannot normalize hatred. We cannot normalize xenophobia and racism. If we're going to tell a story, let's not tell it slant. Let's tell all the truth. When we speak of migrants, we speak of Mami Ewusi Mensah Frimpong, a judge on the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. She's the first black female judge on any of California's 4 federal district courts. She was born here in America to immigrant parents from Ghana. We speak of Peter Bosman, a medical doctor in Ghana who moved to the town of Piran in Slovenia in the 1980s and later became the first black mayor of Piran, the first black mayor in Slovenia and in the whole of Eastern Europe. We speak of T. Michael, the iconic Ghanaian Norwegian artist and designer. And of course, we speak of the late Kofi Annan, former United Nations Secretary General, and Nobel Peace Prize recipient, who was born in Ghana but spent his adulthood in various places in America and Europe. These are people who have brought great distinction to the countries that they decided to call home. Just as the migrants and the children of migrants before them did, I dare say these are not invaders. These are not criminals.
Exactly. When Trump gave the first speech, he was calling immigrants as criminals. The president refutes that claim immediately. I will not go deeper into all this, but you can see what is going on there. The president is disagreeing. The truth is, climate change is the new colonial weapon. Many people have been posting that under my comment lately, which made me to understand that, look, a lot of people who follow this platform, people are so knowledgeable. So I know this is not a news to you. It is said that in whatever you do, don't forget your old friends. The president of Ghana remember Cuba. You know, solidarity of Cuba with Africa is something that we cannot talk about right now. But Cuba is not the enemy of Africa. So the president called for lifting the blockade on Cuba and praised Cuban sacrifice on Africa or in Africa.
And while I'm making requests, I'd like to call for the removal of the blockade on Cuba. As Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, our nation's founder, famously said, we seek to be friends with all and enemies to none. The Cuban people shed their blood on African soil in the fight against apartheid. And indeed, Cuba has been and continues to be a faithful friend of Africa.
What the president did is something that I don't believe many people were expecting that. This is Pan-Africanism in practice. So Africa must never forget her true friends. That's what the president is trying to do. We have to build alliances with those who see us as equal, not as subjects. So, lovely family, the speech of the president of Ghana was very bold, especially on reparations, resource control, UN reform. But the truth also that we need to face is that the UN will never reform itself to favor Africa. It will not happen because power is not given, it is taken. Africa, we must rather stop begging and start building parallel system, an African army, African finance, African trade networks. And if the future actually belongs to Africa, then Africa must stop acting like a child in global politics, asking and begging. The future will not be given to us. We must seize it. That is what Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they are doing. So, lovely family, to me, the speech of the President John Dramani Mahama is fire. It's clean. Let me know your thoughts in the comment. Respect.